My son's wife made me eat in the kitchen during family dinner, but I had one line that made her leave. The kitchen chair creaks beneath me. I don't shift my weight. I've learned not to make too much noise, not to draw attention. The smell of roasted turkey and sweet potatoes fills the air, but it's coming from the dining room, not from where I sit. I fold my napkin across my lap and try to ignore the laughter drifting in through the half-closed swinging door. "I'm sure you'll be more comfortable in here," Eliza had said, breezing past me in her designer heels. Her voice was soft and sweet like artificial honey. My son, her husband, stood behind her, jaw tight, but said nothing. He didn't even meet my eyes. "I'm Helen. I'm 71 years old, and I live alone in a quiet little town outside Columbus, Ohio. I've been a widow for 6 years. My days are filled with gardening, reading, and sometimes just staring out the window, trying to remember what it felt like to be needed. I have one son, Jacob, and he used to call me every Sunday. I glance at the plate in front of me. The food looks fine, nothing burned, nothing cold. Eliza made sure it was plated neatly before I sat down. Just like at the fancy hotels, she chirped. But this isn't a hotel. This is their home, and for most of Jacob's life, I was his home. I rocked him through fevers, cheered him through broken hearts, and walked beside him at his wedding. I held his first child in my arms before she was even bathed. And now I sit alone in a room I didn't choose at a table too small for memories, while they sit just 30 feet away under warm lights and a centerpiece I gave them last Christmas. I try to listen, try not to, but I hear Eliza talking about the new kitchen island. "We're thinking marble, something brighter, cleaner," she says. I imagine her placing her wine glass exactly where it catches the chandelier. I breathe through my nose and try to eat. Halfway through the meal, my granddaughter pokes her head in. "Why are you eating in here, Nana?" I blink, swallow, smile too fast. "Eliza thought I'd be more comfortable," I answer, patting the table. She tilts her head. She's 8 and already wiser than she knows, but you always sit with us. She stands there for a second, waiting for someone to say she's wrong. Then Eliza calls out from the dining room, "Sweetie, come finish your veggies." And just like that, she disappears again like smoke curling back into the fire. I finish eating quickly. The kitchen lights are too harsh, and the silence between clangs of cutlery and faint laughter keeps stretching like a pulled thread. When I scrape the last of the cranberry sauce onto my fork, something stirs inside me. A flicker. A line drawn in sand. This is not grief. I've known grief. My husband's death taught me its shape and sound. No, this is different. This is humiliation. This is invisibility wrapped in politeness, and I feel it wrapping tighter every time Eliza smiles. I wash my plate quietly. I dry it with the towel embroidered with the words, "Family is everything." I gave her that towel. I remember the day I did. She smiled and said thank you, and it disappeared into a drawer for 5 years until today. I should say something. I should walk into that dining room and stand tall like I used to when Jacob forgot to take out the trash or snuck beer into the house at 17. But I don't. Not yet. Instead, I dry my hands, fold the towel, and return to the chair for a moment. Just one moment. The house feels quiet now. Even though it's full of voices, it's quiet in the way things are when you realize they've changed and no one bothered to tell you. I look down at my plate again. Not because I'm hungry, but because I want to remember this moment. The way it felt, the way I sat, the way I almost said nothing. Almost. Because something changed in me tonight. A corner turned, a string pulled tight. And I don't know what I'll say yet, but I know I won't stay silent forever. If you were in my shoes, how would you have handled that moment? Would you have sat down in that kitchen, or would you have stood up and walked out? Jacob was born on a rainy Thursday in March. He came out red-faced and howling, a full head of dark hair and fists clenched like he was ready to take on the world. From the moment they placed him in my arms, I knew I would never love anyone the way I loved that boy. We were a team, just the two of us for the longest time. His father, my late husband Richard, worked long hours on the road for a trucking company, and though he loved Jacob deeply, he wasn't always there. So I was the one who kissed scraped knees and stayed up through midnight fevers. I taught Jacob to tie his shoes, and later how to write a check, how to hold the door for strangers, how to sit with sadness without turning away from it. Our house wasn't big, but it was full of noise and life. pancakes on Saturday mornings, blanket forts in the living room. He loved being close. He'd fall asleep on my shoulder even at 10. I worried sometimes I made him too soft, but he grew into a man who was strong in quiet ways. He called me from college every Sunday, even if just to say, "Hey Ma, you good?" I used to joke that I was his second heart. Then he met Eliza. I'll never forget the first time I saw her. She had this poise about her. Designer shoes, manicured nails, and a handshake that felt more like a job interview than a greeting. She complimented the tablecloth, then wrinkled her nose when I served baked ziti instead of something lighter. Still, I wanted to like her. I tried to like her. For Jacob's sake. I told myself she was just nervous, just trying too hard. I chalked it up to youth, to difference, to whatever excuse I could find to explain the chill in the air whenever we shared a room. They married after 2 years. A spring wedding, all whites and golds and glass. It was beautiful. I wore a soft plum dress and smiled through every photo, every toast. But I knew deep down I was already being edged out. At first it was subtle. Calls from Jacob came every other Sunday instead of every one. Holidays became tentative as they started new traditions. Eliza sent emails instead of calling. When their first child, Lily, was born, I hoped things would turn. That maybe I could be the kind of grandmother I never had. But even then, visits were short-planned to the minute. My casseroles came home untouched. My advice when asked was rarely followed, and later rarely asked at all. It wasn't that Eliza was cruel. She never raised her voice. She never said outright that I wasn't welcome. But kindness, real kindness, isn't about tone. It's in the eyes, the invitations, the unspoken space someone gives you. And with her, I always felt like a guest overstaying my welcome. Jacob tried, I think. I'd catch glimpses of it sometimes, a long hug when we said goodbye, or a phone call that went longer than it should have. But he was stretched between loyalty and love. And love, when twisted the wrong way, can look like silence. I remember one birthday, my 68th. I sat on the porch with a small cake I'd bought for myself. I didn't expect much, but I'd baked enough cakes in my life to know they taste sweeter when someone else lights the candles. Jacob called late that night, said they got busy, that the kids were fussy. I told him not to worry. I said it was fine. I even laughed. But when I hung up, I cried in the dark with the cake still untouched on the table. I began to measure time by how often I was included, and then by how often I was forgotten. And when I was invited, I started noticing patterns. Eliza would organize the seating. She'd forget to mention details. She'd serve meals I couldn't eat and act surprised when I reminded her of my allergy. Maybe she thought I didn't notice. Maybe she wanted me to. Jacob didn't see it, or wouldn't. That was the hardest part. Watching the person you raised drift from the shore, waving as though nothing had changed while you're left ankle deep in cold water, wondering if they even missed the tide. Still, I held on, because love does that. Because mothers do that. But love isn't a license to be dismissed. And mothers, while patient, are not invisible. So when Eliza placed me in the kitchen that night, it wasn't the start of something. It was the punctuation. It was the moment I realized I'd been allowing something all along, and I didn't want to allow it anymore. What do you do when your own child stops seeing you, when they start handing your love to someone else for approval? If you were in my shoes, would you hold on tighter? Or would you finally let go? It started with a dish towel. I know how small that sounds. Insignificant. Silly even. But that's how these things begin, not with slamming doors or raised voices, but with the little things. The towel was part of a set I embroidered myself, the kind with the days of the week and little stitched flowers. I brought it over one Saturday when Jacob and Eliza were hosting brunch in their new house. I thought it would be a sweet personal touch, something to show I cared. Eliza smiled when I handed it to her, a tight, closed-lip smile. She thanked me, turned toward the kitchen drawer, and slipped it in without unfolding it. By the time we sat down to eat, she had a new set out. Matching grays, no flowers, no days, just cold, neat lines. I told myself it didn't matter. She had her own taste. Every woman should be free to make her kitchen hers. But still, I felt it, that little sting. The first real cut came not long after Lily was born. I had spent the whole week crocheting a soft pink blanket. It was delicate work, lace stitch edges, little hearts along the border. When I finally placed it in the gift box and drove it to their house, my heart beat with hope. Eliza opened the door and took it with another one of those polite smiles. She told me they were trying to stick with organic cotton, but that it was sweet of me to try. Then she placed it on the entryway table like it was junk mail. I saw it weeks later shoved in the corner of the linen closet untouched. Still, I said nothing. Because Jacob was happy. Because Lily was healthy. Because the story we tell ourselves as mothers is that we can take the pain if it means our children won't feel it. Then came the photos. Family portraits on the walls, in the hallway, on the mantle. Everyone smiling in coordinated outfits framed perfectly. Everyone but me. I noticed the absence like a missing tooth. There were photos from weekends I didn't even know had happened. Trips to the zoo, beach days, pumpkin patches. I smiled through my visit, complimented the new frames. But that night, alone in bed, I stared at the ceiling and wondered, did they forget to invite me, or did they decide not to? There's a difference. One day, I brought over a pan of baked chicken and mashed potatoes. It was Jacob's favorite. Growing up, he used to sneak spoonfuls straight from the pot. I'd seasoned it just right, left it warm and ready on the counter with a note. The pan was returned 3 days later, clean untouched. We had other plans that night, Eliza explained when I asked. You don't need to bring food, we have groceries. Again, I nodded, smiled, bit my tongue so hard it nearly bled. I kept a journal in those days, just a cheap spiral notebook. I'd write things down that I couldn't say out loud. Eliza's comments, Jacob's silences. My feelings, raw and unfiltered, spilled onto pages like ink that didn't want to stay hidden. One entry I remember simply said, I am not invisible, I am not a burden, I am someone's mother. Still, I kept showing up. I showed up for birthdays with gifts picked weeks in advance. I showed up for dance recitals sitting in the back row clapping until my hands ached. I showed up on holidays with pies and casseroles ready to shrink myself to whatever size they'd allow. But love when bent too long starts to snap, and I could feel the splinters. The final red flag before the kitchen incident came during Lily's 6th birthday. I had asked gently weeks ahead if I could help with anything. Balloons, cake favors, anything. Eliza told me she had it under control. I came anyway early with a basket of favors and cupcakes. She opened the door and blinked like I wasn't supposed to be there. You didn't have to come so early, she said, stepping aside just barely enough for me to walk through. I watched as she placed my basket under the side table behind a stack of party supplies she'd already arranged. My cupcakes remained in the kitchen. The ones she made store-bought with pastel icing were placed front and center on a glass pedestal. No one touched mine. Jacob was busy wrangling balloons and chasing Lily, who ran past me without a glance. For the first time in my life, I felt like a ghost at my own family's gathering. Still, I didn't leave, because mothers stay. That's what we're told, that's what we do. We stay through the awkwardness, the side glances, the subtle erasures. We tell ourselves that being there even quietly, even inconveniently, is better than not being there at all. But I've learned something. There's a kind of heartbreak that isn't loud, that doesn't break dishes or slam doors. It just waits. It lingers. It lets you stew in the discomfort long enough that you start to believe you deserve it. And that is the heartbreak I carried with me right into that kitchen chair. Do you think I should have said something sooner? Or is silence still love if it comes from fear? For the first few years after Jacob married Eliza, Sunday dinners were still a thing. Not every Sunday, no, but often enough to trick me into thinking the rhythm might return. I'd drive over with my slow cooker in the trunk, something warm and ready to serve. Pot roast lasagna chili in the colder months. I used to hum on those drives, imagining Lily helping me stir gravy or asking to lick the beaters like Jacob used to. But the invitations started thinning. At first, it was little things. Oh, we've got plans this weekend. We're going to Eliza's parents' place. Lily's not feeling great, maybe next time. And I understood, truly I did. Families are busy. Children get sick. I'd been a young mother once too. But then the calendar began to fill with their plans and empty with mine. Months would go by without a word. When I called, Eliza would answer with that overly sweet voice that somehow made everything sound like an inconvenience. Oh, this week's just hectic, Helen, you know how it is. And I'd nod though she couldn't see me. I did know how it was. I just also knew she didn't want me there. One winter, I saw photos on social media, Jacob standing with Eliza and the kids beside a snowman in Vermont. Matching scarves, cocoa mugs, smiles that looked carefully arranged. I hadn't even known they left town. That was the first time I deleted a family photo from my fridge. It was a picture of Lily in her Halloween costume dressed as a little cat whiskers drawn on her cheeks. I had sent a care package that year, a hand-sewn tail, a little beaded collar, candy bags. No response. No thank you. Just a silent wall. By the time the next Sunday rolled around, I didn't even expect an invitation. But I got a text from Jacob that afternoon. 4 words. Want to come by? No time, no greeting, no warmth. Still, I said yes. I baked a small apple pie, wrapped it carefully, and drove over. When I walked in, Eliza didn't look up from her tablet. Jacob gave me a half hug. The table was already full. 8 seats, 8 plates, no ninth. I stood there for a moment too long, pie in hand. Jacob pointed vaguely toward the kitchen island and said, "Oh, we didn't know if you were coming for sure." Eliza added, "We thought you might prefer a quieter space." She always wrapped it in kindness. That was her trick. And somehow I always let her. That day, I ate by myself again, at the island, just feet from the table, but not part of it. I listened to the clink of forks and the small talk I wasn't meant to join. Lily barely spoke to me. She was already learning who sat where and why. I left early, the pie barely touched. When I got home, I stood in my small kitchen, lights still off, and looked at my reflection in the window. It startled me. I looked older than I remembered. Not because of age, but because of how small I'd let myself become. When did I start apologizing just for showing up? I kept telling myself that next time would be different. That maybe Jacob would notice. That maybe Eliza would soften. That maybe Lily would ask for me and they'd have to include me. But I was only invited when it was convenient, when her parents weren't around, when they needed a babysitter, when they wanted to clear a conscience or pose for a holiday card. Convenience isn't love, it's scheduling. And I was tired of being a footnote on someone else's calendar, so I stopped bringing casseroles. I stopped calling every Sunday. I didn't stop loving them, of course. That's the curse of motherhood, you don't get to stop. But I pulled back, just a little. Enough to see if anyone noticed the space I left behind. They didn't. Not then. And that was when I began asking myself a question that felt dangerous. If your love is only accepted on someone else's terms, is it still love or just servitude? Have you ever loved someone so much you forgot how to protect yourself? If you were me, would you keep showing up? Or would you finally sit out one Sunday and see who misses you? The invitation came by text, like most things lately. "Hey Ma, we're hosting a weekend thing for Lily's recital, want to stay over?" I reread the message twice, unsure what to feel. Hope flickered, cautious and thin. I hadn't been invited to stay over in nearly a year. Not since before their move to the bigger house across town. I took it as a sign. Maybe things were thawing. Maybe Jacob missed me. Maybe. I baked cinnamon bread the morning I packed 2 loaves. One for them, one for Lily's teacher. I laid out my nicest pajamas, ironed my blouse, even brought my lavender linen spray, because the old trick of making a place smell like home still brought me comfort. I arrived around 3. Jacob greeted me on the porch with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Eliza was inside on a Zoom call in the living room, earbuds in and face tight. She waved a flash of fingers, then turned back to her screen. I placed the bread on the counter and asked where I should put my bag. Jacob hesitated, rubbing the back of his neck. The couch is probably best," he said. "The guest room's full of stuff right now. We've been reorganizing." I blinked. "Oh, I thought maybe I'd use the upstairs room." He shifted. "Yeah, we were going to clear it out, but just didn't get around to it." I peeked down the hallway. The guest room door was shut. Not locked, not taped off, just closed. I could see the light was on under the door. A soft glow that said the room wasn't abandoned. I didn't ask to open it. I didn't press. But I noticed the diaper bag by the door, the folded towels on the side table, and most telling of all, the faint sound of a white noise machine from inside. They weren't reorganizing. The room was in use, just not for me. The couch was leather, cold. The throw blanket was thin, scratchy. I sat down carefully, trying not to wrinkle my dress. The thought of sleeping there made something twist in my stomach, but I smiled anyway. Told Jacob it was fine. Said, "Don't worry about me." Eliza passed through later, phone still in hand, and said, "Thanks for being flexible." That word flexible knotted in my throat, as though it were my job to bend around everyone else's comfort, as though my presence in my son's home was something to be managed. That night after the recital where Lily waved at me once from the stage, and never again I returned to the couch while Jacob and Eliza disappeared into their room. They didn't say goodnight. I lay there in the dark shoes off dress folded on the armrest beside me. The sound of their laughter filtered through the walls, soft but undeniable. And I lay there, eyes open, heart heavy, asking myself the same question over and over. What did I do to deserve the couch? I thought about all the times I'd cleaned up after Jacob's stomach flu, wiped his nose during Sunday school, stayed up sewing a costume the night before Halloween. All the quiet sacrifices that mothers make and never mention. And now I was here, curled up under a throw blanket like a house guest who overstayed her welcome. Around midnight, I got up and padded to the guest room door. I didn't open it, just stood there. I thought about knocking. I thought about saying I'm not here for comfort. I'm here because I love you. And I miss being part of this family in a real way. But I didn't, because the person who needed to hear that wasn't in that room. He was in the one next to it, curled up beside a woman who never saw me as family to begin with. I returned to the couch, laid down, closed my eyes, and in the darkness I started writing the speech I'd one day say, not to be cruel, not to shame, but because there comes a time when being quiet becomes more painful than being honest. If your child offers you a couch while strangers sleep in the guest room, what would you say? Would you take the blanket and smile? Or would you finally ask why the door is closed? Lily found me the next morning on the couch, curled into myself like a crooked comma. She tiptoed in blanket trailing behind her and whispered, "Nana." I opened my eyes, surprised she was awake before the others. Her curls were still tangled from sleep, and she clutched a stuffed elephant by the neck like it might disappear. "Why are you sleeping here?" she asked, voice soft. I sat up slowly, smoothing my hair with one hand and patting the cushion beside me with the other. "Just needed to be close to the kitchen," I said with a smile. "Old bones don't like too many stairs." She giggled, not because it was funny, but because she loved me and didn't understand why that love seemed complicated for everyone else. Lily climbed up next to me, her little feet pressing into the cushion as she curled into my side. I wrapped an arm around her and held her, trying to savor the warmth before someone came in and reminded her to keep a little distance. She traced the stitching on my blouse and said, "Mommy says you like being alone." I froze, just for a second. Then I asked gently, "And what do you think?" Lily shrugged. "I think you look lonely sometimes. You look at everyone like you're trying to remember something." I kissed the top of her head, blinked quickly, and said, "Maybe I'm just remembering how much I love you." Later that morning, while I poured juice and Eliza scrolled through her phone, Lily asked if I could come to her art show next week. Before I could answer, Eliza said, "That's just for parents and teachers, sweetheart." Lily frowned, "But Nana's like a teacher." She showed me how to tie my shoes. Eliza smiled, that tight smile again, the one she always used when she didn't want to appear harsh, but also didn't want me included. "We'll see," she said. I wanted to say, why not let her have all the people who love her in the room, but I bit my tongue again. That afternoon, I sat on the back porch with Thomas, my grandson. He's quieter than Lily lives in his own little world of dinosaurs and books. He climbed into my lap, even though he was getting too big for it, and whispered, "When do you go home?" "Tomorrow morning," I said. "Oh," he looked down at his socks. "I wish you stayed more." "Me too," I said. He nodded like he already understood that something about my visits didn't feel right, that I came with bags but left with silence, that I was here but never fully welcomed. Children don't have the vocabulary for exclusion, but they feel it. In the pauses, in the corrections, in how often they're told, "Not now," when they reach for me. I watched them both that day, playing with sidewalk chalk on the driveway, drawing big crooked hearts with their names inside. Lily wrote mine too, in pink Nana, and for the first time in months, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long while: purpose. They still saw me. Through the noise, the edits, the polite neglect, they still saw the woman who made pancakes in the shape of bears and taught them to whistle with blades of grass. Later that evening, Lily sat beside me again, while Eliza and Jacob were in the other room. "Do you ever get sad, Nana?" I didn't expect the question. "Sometimes," I admitted, "but it's okay to be sad when you love people." She nodded, thinking hard. "I think Mommy gets mad when people are sad around her. She says feelings are too much, but you don't feel too much. You feel like me." I held her tight, tighter than usual, And when Jacob passed by the hallway and glanced in, I didn't look away. I didn't shrink. Because in that moment, my granddaughter gave me something her parents hadn't in years. She made room for me. She reminded me that while I may be invisible to adults busy building their perfect image, I am seen by the ones who matter most, the ones still learning how to love without rules. If your grandchildren looked up at you with that kind of raw truth, what would you protect more? Your silence, I found out about Thanksgiving from the woman at the post office. Her name's Cheryl, always quick with a smile and a story. I was mailing a small package to my sister in Arizona cranberry jam, some pumpkin cookies, and she leaned over the counter and said, "So excited your family's doing that big thing this year. Jacob told my husband they rented a whole cabin up in Hocking Hills. Sounds magical." I smiled back, nodded politely, but inside I felt my stomach hollow out. A cabin, a trip, Thanksgiving. I hadn't been told a word. When I got home, I placed the empty cookie tin in the sink and stood there, one hand on the counter, the other on my hip, just staring at the calendar. I'd circled Thanksgiving weeks ago, November 24th. A little maple leaf doodle, a note in the corner, roast sweet potatoes, green bean casserole, Helen's apple pie. It was supposed to be at my house this year. We'd always traded off. Last year, it was at Jacob's, the year before that, Eliza's parents. This one was supposed to be mine. I called Jacob that afternoon. No answer. I didn't leave a message. He texted me the next day, "Hey, sorry, been crazy here, all good." I stared at the screen for a long time. Eventually, I typed, "I heard about Hocking Hills, sounds lovely." A few minutes later, "Yeah, Eliza's idea. Just thought it'd be fun to get out of town for a change. Fresh air, you know." No mention of me joining, no invitation, no apology. I replied, "Hope it's special. Let me know if you need anything." He never did. That Thursday, I set a table for one, just me and the quiet. I still made the sweet potatoes. I still lit a candle. I even played some jazz on the old record player, trying to trick myself into believing it was just a different kind of Thanksgiving. But no scent of turkey filled the air. No grandkids came barreling through the door shouting about what they were thankful for. No Eliza pretending to like my stuffing. No Jacob falling asleep on the couch like he used to. Just me and a single slice of pie. Around 4 p.m., I got a photo from Eliza in the family group chat. It showed Lily and Thomas bundled in scarves standing outside a log cabin, cheeks rosy. Behind them, a fire pit flickered, and a long wooden table was set with mismatched plates and plaid napkins. A caption underneath, "Happy Thanksgiving from our crew to yours." I stared at the photo until my eyes blurred. No one noticed I didn't reply, no one called. I know people will say I should have reached out, that I should have asked to come, said something, made a fuss. But that's not the point. When someone wants you there, they don't make you ask. They make space without being told. And what hurt most wasn't that they forgot. It's that they remembered and still didn't include me. The next morning, I walked to the park near my house. The trees were mostly bare, save a few stubborn golden leaves still clinging to branches. I sat on a bench wrapped in my old wool coat and listened to the sound of crows overhead and children laughing far off. I closed my eyes and thought of the years before, of little Jacob in his pilgrim hat reciting his part in the school play, of Richard carving the turkey while I poured cider into mugs, of laughter that never had to be curated or filtered or tagged online. And then I thought about now, about the slow unspooling of connection, the invitations that never came, the shrinking presence I had in a family I helped build from the ground up. When I got home that afternoon, I made a promise to myself. No more assuming they'd notice my silence. Next time they'd hear it. And if the only way to be seen was to stop playing along, then I was ready to stop. Have you ever been erased from something you helped create? If so, did you wait to be welcomed back? Or did you walk away holding your own dignity like a shield? It was the week before Jacob's birthday when I got the text. Short, rushed, just like always. "Hey, Ma, Eliza's throwing a little dinner Saturday. Come by if you want." If you want. As if I'd been invited to a potluck, not my only son's birthday. I stared at the message phone buzzing in my palm like a nervous apology. There was no time listed. No mention of what I could bring. No warmth. Still, I said yes. Because that's what I do. Because no matter how small the olive branch, I reach for it. I spent the afternoon before the dinner making his favorite pecan bars with a caramel drizzle. He used to request them every year when he was little, called them sticky squares. I hadn't made them in a while, didn't know if he even remembered. When I arrived, the house looked the same, large, quiet, polished. lights glowing behind sheer curtains. The front door opened before I could knock. "Hey Ma," Jacob said, one arm holding the baby monitor, the other gesturing me in. He kissed my cheek quick and distracted. His eyes were tired. There were shadows there, old ones. Inside the dining room was already full. The table was set for 10. Eliza's parents were there, a few of Jacob's friends, even their neighbor from across the street. I scanned the room, every seat taken. Eliza emerged from the kitchen, sleek and smiling. She handed me a glass of wine, said, "Glad you could make it," and turned back without another word. There was no chair for me. I stood there for a full beat, arms stiff around the tray of pecan bars. Eliza glanced back at me, eyebrows raised. "Oh, we weren't sure if you were coming. We thought maybe the kitchen table might be better, actually. Quieter. You know how noisy it gets in here." No one looked up, not even Jacob. I nodded, like I always do. They led me to the small round table near the bay window. A single place setting, no centerpiece, no candle. The wine sat untouched beside my plate. My food came late after the first round of toasts. I listened to laughter and clinking glasses echo from the other room, every sound sharper in the quiet. I picked at my salad, tasted nothing. My pecan bars still on the tray remained on the kitchen counter, forgotten. Halfway through the meal, I looked up and saw Lily peeking in from the hallway. She padded over in socked feet and sat beside me without asking. "Nana, why are you out here?" she whispered. I smiled. I like the quiet sweetheart. She frowned. "But it's Daddy's birthday. We're supposed to be together." I kissed her forehead. Sometimes people forget what matters. It doesn't mean we have to. Jacob appeared a moment later, gently took her hand and said, "Sweetie, come back to the table." She looked at me, then at him. "But Nana's all by herself." Jacob paused just a second, then said, "It's okay, she's fine," and led her away. I watched them go, the sound of her small footsteps fading like raindrops down a window. I should have stood up then, walked out, taken the tray of pecan bars and left without a word. But I didn't, because I still wanted to be wanted. And isn't that the sharpest ache of all? Not being included, but still hoping next time might be different. When the cake came out, I watched from the edge of the room. No one called me in. No one asked for a photo. When I left, Jacob walked me to the door and said, "Thanks for coming, Ma." I looked at him for a long moment. "You remember what you used to call those pecan bars?" I asked, holding up the tray. He blinked. "Sticky squares." A smile cracked through, small, real. "I remember," he said. I nodded. "Good, I wasn't sure you still did." I turned and walked down the steps. The night was cold, the wind sharp, but I didn't shiver, because something in me had finally solidified. They could forget me, they could push me out, but they could no longer shrink me. If your presence has to be squeezed into a corner, what happens if you stop fitting in quietly? If you were me, would you keep hoping? Or would you start preparing for the moment when hope gives way to truth? It was Easter Sunday when it happened. I'd been invited, yes invited for once with advance notice. A real message from Jacob 3 days before. "We're doing brunch at ours, 11 a.m. Eliza's putting together something nice. Hope you can come." 3 whole days' notice. That alone should have made me suspicious. Still, I pressed my dress the night before. A soft blue one I used to wear to church. I baked a braided lemon loaf and tied a ribbon around the foil. I even brought a small tulip arrangement, yellow and white, Jacob's childhood favorite. I arrived 10 minutes early. Old habit. I rang the bell, balancing the flowers in one arm, the loaf in the other. Eliza opened the door. "Oh," she said, surprised. "You're early." I forced a smile, just wanted to help set up. She hesitated before stepping aside. "We're mostly done, but sure." I stepped inside and saw the table. Long, white linen, golden chargers and cloth napkins, a glass vase filled with pastel eggs in the center, and 10 chairs each set precisely as though arranged for a catalogue shoot. 10 chairs. Not 11. Not one extra. And not a single place that looked temporary or adjustable. Eliza returned to the kitchen and I stood there still holding the bread and flowers like a guest who had mistaken the date. Jacob walked in adjusting his collar. "Hey Ma, you look nice." I turned, trying to keep my voice even. "Thanks. I brought the lemon loaf." "Oh, good," he said, taking it from me like an errand. Eliza's mom brought pastries too. We're pretty loaded with desserts. I looked at the table again. "So where should I sit?" He glanced toward the dining room, then toward the kitchen. "Oh, Eliza thought maybe you'd be more comfortable at the island. She said you like a little more elbow room, less crowded." He said it gently, like he thought he was doing me a favor. Less crowded. Like I was an old lamp they didn't have space for, so they tucked me away where no one would trip over it. I looked at the dining room again. The chairs were all filled now: Eliza's parents, her sister and brother-in-law, a neighbor couple, Jacob, Lily, Thomas, and even the new baby's bassinet at the head, and then me somewhere off to the side, invisible. I opened my mouth, and for the first time nothing came out, because it hit me hard and full. This was never going to change. There would always be 10 chairs. There would always be polite excuses. There would always be a place for me, just not with them. I took the flowers back from the counter and quietly moved to the kitchen, sat on the stool by the island. Eliza passed behind me once and said, "We'll bring you a plate in just a sec." Bring me a plate like I was staff, or an afterthought, or both. I stared out the window, watching Lily chase Thomas through the backyard, their laughter muffled by the double-paned glass. Jacob never looked over. He laughed with the neighbor, raised a toast with his in-laws, and smiled as if nothing was missing. I reached into my purse, pulled out a napkin, and began folding it. An old habit. I used to do it when I was anxious. During school plays, job interviews, Jacob's first ER visit, when he cracked his chin open. Fold, unfold, refold. A quiet ritual to keep my hands from shaking. The napkin trembled anyway. And then I heard a voice behind me. "You okay, Helen?" It was Eliza's mother, Barbara. Kind woman. A little nervous, but never unkind. I nodded, just tired. These early brunches aren't for old bones. She smiled awkward, didn't sit down, didn't offer her chair. Just said, "Well, your bread smells amazing." Eliza said it's not gluten-free, but it's the thought that counts. The thought. That phrase landed hard, because that's what I was to them, wasn't I? A thought. A notion. A figure in a photo album who could be cropped out when it didn't match the aesthetic. I waited until they served dessert, until the egg hunt started in the backyard. Then I quietly picked up my purse, grabbed my now cold lemon loaf, and walked out the side door. No one followed. No one called after me. No one noticed. And I walked home alone, flowers wilting in one hand, bread pressed against my chest like a child carrying home something broken. Have you ever looked at a table full of people you love and realized there's no seat for you anymore? If you were me, would you have sat anyway? Or would you have finally stood up, not to be included, but to be seen? That night after the brunch, where no one saved me a seat, I made myself dinner. Not out of hunger, grief dulls appetite, but because routine has always been my anchor. I peeled a potato, boiled an egg, opened a can of green beans, and warmed them with butter and salt, the way Jacob used to like when he was little. The lemon loaf sat on the counter, untouched, its ribbon fraying at the edges. I didn't bother setting the table, just used a single plate, a cloth napkin, and sat by the kitchen window. I could still hear echoes of laughter, not from their house anymore, but from the shadow of memory. Lily's squeals during her 3rd birthday when the balloon popped and she screamed, and Jacob rushed over and I held her until she stopped shaking. Thomas, his small hand in mine, on his first walk through the pumpkin patch. Jacob at 12 announcing he wanted to be just like Dad, and then softly, but also just like you. These moments come back when no one else is around. They visit like ghosts, not to haunt, but to remind you of what once made you whole. I chewed slowly, deliberately, as though I could make the meal mean something if I paid close enough attention. The TV was off. The house was silent except for the occasional creak of the floorboards, old wood settling like a sigh. I'd lived in this house for over 40 years, raised Jacob in it, mourned Richard in it, painted the kitchen twice, replaced the windows, sewed curtains with sunflowers that faded in time. It held my whole life like a palm holds a seed, careful, steady, and waiting for something to grow again. I looked down at my plate and realized I'd barely eaten. The food had gone cold, but I stayed there, hands resting beside my fork, as if I were waiting for someone to join me. No one did. No one called. No one texted to ask if I'd gotten home safely. I thought about how many dinners I'd made over the years, how many times I'd waited for Jacob to come home from practice or stayed up reheating leftovers after Richard missed another late shift. How often I ate last, not out of custom, but because I wanted them fed and happy first. And now I was alone, not just in body but in spirit, because there's a different kind of loneliness that hits when the people you love are alive and well and simply don't want you there. I don't think we talk enough about that kind of grief, the one where no one dies but you lose them anyway. Slowly, politely, with soft smiles and casual disregard. After I cleared the dishes, I sat with a cup of tea that went cold in my hands. I picked up a notepad and wrote down one line: "They don't see what they're doing, but I do." I stared at it, circled it, underlined it twice. Because clarity is a strange gift. It doesn't arrive when you're angry. It doesn't come during confrontation. It comes later when the house is quiet and you're sitting at a table that only has one chair. It comes when you hear them laughing from across a wall you never built but were forced to stand behind. They didn't mean to hurt me, not on purpose. But neglect doesn't have to be loud to do its damage. And silence doesn't have to be cruel to leave a bruise. Sometimes it's just people who were once your entire world deciding you're no longer essential to theirs. And still I love them. God help me, I love them. Because love isn't a faucet you can shut off when it scalds you. But it is a light you can choose not to shine for people who no longer look your way. That night I didn't cry. There are tears that come easily, ones that spill from a wound. And there are tears that dry before they ever reach the surface. The kind that stay stuck in your throat and make your voice quieter the next day. That's the kind I swallowed. If you'd sat at that kitchen table with the ghost of a family just out of reach, would you have called them? Would you have begged for a seat? Or would you have finally set your own A-week after Easter Jacob stopped by? Unannounced just after lunch. I was still in my robe, hair pulled back, slippers, quiet on the hardwood. I heard the knock and felt my chest tighten the way it always does now when something unexpected arrives. He stood there on the porch holding a plastic bag with a bakery logo I didn't recognize. "Brought you a Danish," he said. "Lily said you liked the cherry kind." I stepped aside, letting him in without a word. He moved like a man who had rehearsed the visit too many times and still didn't know his lines. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table I'd eaten alone at a week before, watching the sunlight stretch shadows across my empty plate. He placed the bag in front of me like a peace offering. I opened it slowly, took out the pastry and placed it on a saucer. I didn't take a bite. Jacob cleared his throat. "So Easter was nice, huh?" I looked at him. He looked at the floor. And that was the moment I understood something my son couldn't face me, not because he was angry, but because he was ashamed. Ashamed of what he'd allowed. Ashamed of what he hadn't stopped. I folded my hands around my tea mug and said softly, "I noticed there were 10 chairs." His eyes flicked up just for a second, then dropped again. "Yeah, Eliza had it all set up. You didn't think to add one more." He opened his mouth, closed it, rubbed the back of his neck like he used to when he was 16, and caught lying about where he'd been. "It just happened fast," he muttered. "We didn't mean anything by it." "But you noticed," I said. He was quiet. I watched him, my son, the same boy I rocked through night terrors, who once refused to leave my side at kindergarten drop-off, who held my hand when we buried his father. And now he couldn't meet my eyes. "Jacob," I said quietly, "I don't need grand gestures. I don't need flowers or framed photos or big apologies. I just needed a chair, just one chair, at your table." He swallowed hard, nodding. "I know, Ma, I messed up." He looked up at last. His eyes were red-rimmed, full of something like regret and something deeper fear. "Sometimes, Eliza, she just handles things, and I try not to make it worse." I tilted my head. "By making sure I'm not in the way?" He exhaled a long, defeated breath. "I didn't want to choose. And yet you did." We sat in the stillness of that. I reached for the pastry, broke off a piece, placed it on a napkin. "You were raised better than this," I said. "Not cruelly, not even coldly, just truthfully." "I know." Silence again. He looked around the kitchen like it might help him remember who I used to be to him. There was a crayon drawing Lily made taped to my fridge, an old photo of Jacob and me at the zoo, my arm around his shoulder, a recipe card with my handwriting stained and worn. He blinked fast, then asked, "Do you still want to come to Lily's recital next week?" I looked at him for a long moment. Then I said, "Does Eliza?" He hesitated. That pause told me everything. "I want you there," he said finally. "That's not the same." He nodded, quiet, wounded maybe, but not confused. "I didn't raise you to be spineless," I added. "You're allowed to stand between what's right and what's easy, and you're allowed to say no to someone even if you love them." He looked down at his hands. "I'll figure it out," he said, "I promise." I stood, walked to the window, looked out over my small backyard, the dogwood tree just starting to bloom, the same one Jacob planted with Richard when he was 7. "Promises are easy," I said. "It's the follow-through that counts." He stood too, lingered at the door. "I'll call you later." I nodded, "If you mean it." Then he left. The pastry sat untouched on the table. I stared at it for a long time before finally throwing it in the trash. Because the thing about regret is it only matters if it leads to change. If not, it's just another form of self-pity. Have you ever looked at someone you love and wondered how they stopped seeing your worth? And when they finally looked again, did you open your arms or protect your heart? The invitation came late. Not in timing, but in effort. A text from Eliza, formally written like she was addressing an acquaintance, not her children's grandmother. We're having a family dinner next Sunday. Hope you can join. Let us know by Friday for seating. For seating, that was the line that made me pause. Not for dinner, not for food allergies, not even so we can plan, but for seating, like I was luggage on a train that needed exact measurements. Still, I said yes. But I did not come to be seated wherever they put me this time. I came with resolve in my spine and words I had folded and unfolded like a secret letter for years. I wore my navy dress, the one with pearl buttons that Richard had loved. I brought nothing in my hands, not pie, not bread, not an apology. Eliza answered the door. You're early, she said as always. Good, I said, that means I can pick my seat. She blinked, didn't move, just stepped aside like I was an expected package from a store she forgot she'd ordered. The table was already set, 10 chairs, all filled with name cards this time. I walked the length of it slowly, ran my finger over each one. Barbara, Stephen, Jacob, Lily, Thomas, even one labeled baby in delicate script. There was no card for Helen. Not again. I turned to Jacob, who stood stiff near the sideboard, sipping water like he needed it to keep his mouth shut. Eliza, I said, voice steady, you forgot one. She looked up, blinking. Oh, we assumed you'd sit in the kitchen. You've done it before. Jacob's head dropped slightly, a tiny flinch. I stepped back, not in retreat, but in preparation. Then I said it. The line I'd waited to say. The line I'd whispered in the dark, practiced under my breath while folding towels, clung to in silence while others laughed over plates I'd never been invited to. I looked her straight in the eyes and said, one day your children will remember how you treated their grandmother. I hope you're proud of the example you've set. The room fell silent, utterly, wholly, terribly silent. You could have heard the breath freeze in Jacob's chest. Eliza's lips parted like she wanted to say something, but the words were stuck somewhere behind her pride. I didn't wait for a reply. I pulled a chair from the dining room table, one that had been pushed against the wall, decorative but functional. I carried it with both hands and set it squarely between Lily and Jacob's place settings. Then I sat. Lily looked at me wide-eyed, then smiled, bright, certain. Jacob finally breathed out. He sat down without a word, hands folded like a child at a lesson. Eliza stood for a moment longer, then turned and walked back into the kitchen. That was the end of her power. Because silence had always been her weapon, but now I had used it too. I didn't speak again through the meal unless Lily asked me something. I answered gently fed Thomas bites of mashed potatoes and watched as Eliza fumed silently behind her glass of rosé. She had no line to undo mine, no way to scrub it from the memory of her children who saw the whole thing. Sometimes it only takes one sentence to change everything. And sometimes it's the sentence that takes years of quiet to build. I left early that night, didn't wait for dessert, but I left on my feet with my coat on my shoulders and the respect of two small children who would grow up remembering that their Nana stood her ground, that she didn't cry in the kitchen or slink away with her head down. She showed up. She made space. She took her chair. If you had one moment to say what needed to be said, would you? And would you be willing to carry the silence that follows just to feel the weight of your own worth? I didn't hear from Jacob the next day, not the day after either. And I didn't expect to. There are silences that punish, and then there are silences that process. I knew this one was the latter. My words had settled like stones in a still pond, quiet at first, but rippling outward in ways no one could stop. The following Friday, just after I returned from the market, I found an envelope in my mailbox. No stamp. Just my name written across the front in slanted, uncertain handwriting. Inside was a note, no greeting, no closing. I didn't know what to say in the moment, but I heard you. I'm sorry. I don't know how to fix it. Love, Jacob. I sat at the kitchen table holding that slip of paper like it was heavier than it looked. Not because it fixed anything, but because it proved he'd finally seen me. That Sunday, Jacob showed up on my porch with Lily and Thomas in tow. No Eliza. The kids ran inside like nothing had ever been wrong already, asking for juice and their favorite blankets. Jacob stayed on the porch a few minutes longer, shifting his weight from foot to foot. She's staying with her sister for a few days, he said. I raised an eyebrow. We fought, he added quieter, not just about dinner, about everything. He looked down. She said, I always take your side. I said nothing. He sighed. The truth is, I haven't taken anyone's side for a long time. That finally was honesty. He followed the kids inside and spent the afternoon there on the floor with Thomas reading books, with Lily occasionally sneaking a glance at me as I stirred soup on the stove like it was any other day. But we both knew it wasn't. That evening, as he packed their jackets and snacks, he turned to me and said, "She wants space. I think I do too." I just nodded. I didn't press, because mothers know when to hold the door and when to hold their tongues. The next few weeks shifted slowly like furniture being moved an inch at a time. There was no big blow-up, no dramatic divorce, just absence, distance, fewer photos of Eliza on Jacob's social media, more visits with the kids, more silence from her, and then one day a phone call not from Jacob but from Barbara, Eliza's mother. "I just wanted you to know," she said softly, "not everyone in our family agrees with how things have been handled." It wasn't an apology, but it was something. "I know," I said. "I've always known." She hesitated. She doesn't always see herself clearly. And Jacob, he's been in survival mode. "I raised him not to survive marriage," I said gently, "but to live it honestly." A long pause. "Would you come to Lily's piano recital next week?" she asked. "I'm not sure who will be sitting where, but well, I think your presence might matter more than anyone's right now." I said yes. Not because I needed the validation, but because that little girl with the quick mind and watchful eyes deserved to see her nana in a chair on purpose, not tucked away, not added last minute, not handled like a problem. At the recital, I dressed in a plum sweater and grey slacks. Simple, presentable, strong. I sat in the second row. Jacob saved the seat beside him, not Eliza. When Lily spotted me from the stage, her whole face lit up. She waved not a shy wiggle of fingers, but a bold, wide-armed wave that made a few parents chuckle. That was all the applause I needed. Afterward, we shared cake in the community hall. Jacob handed me a slice without a word, just a nod. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like a guest in my own family. I felt like a pillar, like someone who had earned her place not by being quiet, but by refusing to disappear. Some family shifts happen with shouting and slammed doors. Others happen like this, quietly but unmovably, one honest moment at a time. If you had the chance to reclaim your space, not with anger but with truth, would you take it? Even if it meant letting the silence speak for you until they were ready to listen. It was a Thursday morning when I found Jacob on my doorstep again. This time he didn't knock, just stood there with his hands in his pockets the same way he did when he was 10 and came home after breaking the neighbor's window. I opened the door slowly, unsure what version of him I'd find. "Hi, Ma," he said, his voice raw from something recent. "Got a minute?" I stepped back and let him in. The kettle was already on the way it always was at that hour. I didn't offer him coffee. He didn't ask. He sat at the table and ran his hands over the wood grain like it held the answers he didn't know how to speak. "Eliza and I are taking some space," he said, eyes not on me but on the window. "It's not official. We haven't said the words. But she's at her sister's, and I've been sleeping in the guest room." I poured 2 cups of tea, one for him, one for me. He didn't touch his. "I think I kept thinking things would settle," he continued. "That if I just kept my head down, she'd stop seeing you as a threat. But it didn't work. And I started seeing it too. How invisible you've had to become." His voice cracked on that last word. Invisible. I sat across from him, watched his hands shake slightly as he tried to pick up the mug, then gave up. "You remember when I broke my arm?" he asked suddenly. "That summer before high school?" I nodded. "You refused to cry, even when the doctor set the bone." "I cried that night," he said. "You were in the kitchen. I heard you humming. I didn't want you to see me weak." I smiled a sad kind. "You weren't weak, Jacob. You were just trying to be strong alone." He looked at me then full on. And for the first time in years, he looked young. Not just tired or distracted, but like a boy again, uncertain, vulnerable, full of that old need to be held and forgiven. "I didn't protect you, Ma. I didn't speak up. I let things happen around me, and then I acted like I didn't notice." I reached across the table and placed my hand on his. "You noticed. You just didn't know what to do with the noticing." Tears welled up in his eyes then. "I'm sorry." It was not the first time I'd imagined this moment, but it was the first time I let it be exactly what it was: messy, sincere, late, and still deeply needed. "I'm not angry," I said, and meant it. I was never angry. I was heartbroken. There's a difference. He looked down. Do you think we can fix this, me and you?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I went to the drawer and pulled out a folded piece of paper, one of my journal pages, one he hadn't seen before. I handed it to him. He opened it slowly, eyes scanning my handwriting. "I don't need to be at the center of their world. I just want to know I haven't been erased from it." He blinked hard, then nodded. "You haven't been. Not anymore. I swear to you I won't let that happen again." I believed him, not because of the words, but because he was here, alone, without Eliza, without the buffer of children or cake or occasion, just him and the truth. He stayed for hours that day. We talked about nothing and everything, about the kids' new teachers, about the recipe for the lemon bars he used to love, about how Eliza wasn't a villain, just someone shaped by a different world, different expectations, and a need for control that had gone too far. We didn't talk about what would happen next. We didn't need to. The healing had already begun, and healing doesn't need declarations. It needs presence, repetition, and the willingness to keep showing up even when the chairs have been moved around too many times. That night after he left, I walked through the house and turned on all the lights, not out of fear, out of defiance, because no part of me would be dimmed anymore. If your child finally comes back, not just physically, but with his heart cracked open, do you embrace him without hesitation? Or do you ask him to earn his place back one dinner, one call, one truth at a time? Mother's Day came 2 weeks later. No text from Eliza, I didn't expect one. But Jacob called, and he said simply, "We're having lunch here. The kids are excited. I've set the table for 5. I saved your seat." I didn't ask where Eliza would be. I didn't have to. When I arrived, it was just Jacob Lily Thomas and the baby who gurgled in her bouncer as sunlight pooled across the living room rug. The table was set, no place cards, no hierarchy, just plates, flowers from Lily's school garden, and a chair at the head of the table. My chair. I didn't cry, I didn't make a speech. I simply sat. And it felt like reclaiming a part of myself that had gone missing in increments, each meal alone, each door closed, each time I folded pain into silence like linen napkins tucked away too long. Jacob brought out grilled chicken pasta salad, the lemon loaf he tried to recreate from memory. It was too dense, the glaze uneven, but I ate it like it was made by the hands of a Michelin chef. Lily held my hand most of the meal. She told me she made me a card with extra glitter because you're sparkly now. Sparkly. I hadn't felt sparkly in years. Thomas told me I had the best laugh. It sounds like a piano that's only happy. I didn't know what he meant, but I accepted it, because he meant it with love. After lunch, we sat in the backyard. No plans, no agendas, just grass stains and clouds and stories from when Jacob was little. He laughed more that day than I'd heard in a year. And when he hugged me goodbye, it was long, like he didn't want to let go, like he was afraid letting go might mean going backward. "I love you, Ma," he said into my shoulder. "I know," I whispered back. "Now don't forget it." Later that evening, alone again in my quiet house, I poured a glass of lemonade and sat on the porch. I didn't feel lonely. I felt full. Because I hadn't clawed my way back into their lives, I had reminded them I never left. I had just stepped aside for a time, hoping they'd notice the shape of my absence. Now they had, and maybe Eliza would come back around, maybe not. That wasn't my concern anymore. I'd spent years waiting for permission. Now I took up space. I didn't need to be the centerpiece, but I would never again be folded into the edges. I had a seat, one I chose, one I brought with me if they forgot again. Because love is patient, but dignity is not disposable. And being a mother doesn't mean erasing yourself for someone else's version of family. It means being present with grace, with boundaries, and yes, with sparkles if needed. And as the sun lowered, casting long, soft shadows across my porch, I thought, if they try to push me out again, I won't beg. I'll leave the chair empty and let it echo. Life, I've learned, is full of small turns. Moments where you decide, not loudly but deeply, that you will no longer settle for less than your full worth. It doesn't take a fight or a letter or a storming out, it just takes a quiet decision to stop shrinking. For years I tried to make myself convenient, palatable, invisible. But hearts don't bloom in silence, they need warmth, they need light, and they need a place at the table. If you've ever felt like the room went on without you, like your seat had been quietly removed, know this. You can always bring your own chair, and not just to dinner, to relationships, to holidays, to moments when your presence is treated like an afterthought. Bring it. Set it down. Sit tall. And if someone winces when you do well, that's on them. Your love doesn't make you a burden. Your wisdom doesn't make you outdated. Your quiet doesn't mean you have nothing to say. It means you've been listening. And maybe now it's your turn to be heard. To anyone who has felt pushed out of the life they helped build, I offer this: you are not too much. You are not unreasonable. You are not unlovable. You are a presence, a pulse, a story that still deserves to be told. And if you were me, what would you do now? Would you wait for them to see you? Or would you stand gently and say, I've always been here, you just stopped looking?